So welcome to Tech Tuesday. This is the sixth of our monthly sessions on Tech Tuesday, where we're featuring fueling innovation and how innovation comes from different places and through different pathways. And before we start the session, I'd like to make one brief announcement. So our Nurse Innovator program, the deadline for applications on that program is this Friday. If you don't know about the program, please, you can check it out at our website, mcamericas.org, and I will put the link in the chat box. And we are looking for healthcare practitioners who have a product idea that they'd like to bring to market. So if you have an idea and you want to develop that idea, we invite you to join the Nurse Innovator Accelerator program. And before we start, we would like to turn the platform over to a new member of our innovation ecosystem who's just moved here. Her name is Judy Broussard, and I'm going to turn it over to Judy to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to meet you all virtually. My name is Judy, and I'm a recent transplant to El Paso from Toronto originally. I work remotely for UNC Chapel Hill for Innovate Carolina, specifically Kickstart Venture Services, where we support the startups that are IP-based spinning out of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about the entrepreneurial life science ecosystem here in El Paso. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to introduce myself.
Wonderful. And we are very glad to have you in the community. So now, Tech Tuesday, Alberto Ponce, who's a member of the Innovation Center team, is going to introduce our speakers today, and he'll be leading the discussion and the questions. Alberto?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. With us, we have Stephen Khuong, who's the co-founder and CEO of Curacubby, the leading integrated payments and business platform for schools of all sizes. Featured as a thought leader on national media, including CNN, Forbes, and Inc. magazine. He currently serves as mentor on Invest Yodlee. I hope I pronounced that well. The FinTech Launchpad, and as an advisor to Arrowhead on NMSU. He has a bachelor's degrees on mass communication from the University of California in Berkeley. Erik Pavia is the entrepreneur at residence in the MCA Innovation Center. He has a company called Pantheon. It's a fitness and wellness app designed for teams, and it's the first social fitness game. Erik has a bachelor's on business administration from UTEP and a law degree from Stanford University. And his experience goes back that through StartX, Stanford's accelerator program. He joined Notch at an ad analytics startup company as the head of operations, and later he returned to El Paso and founded Pantheon, and is right now a crucial part of the innovation ecosystem. So thank you both of you for joining in and having this discussion with us.
Thank you, Alberto. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, man.
Well, my introductions are pretty just on the top, on surface level. If you could start by giving us your pitch, what your company is, what your background is, that would be great. Well, should we start with you, Stephen?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. My name is Stephen Khuong. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Curacubby. We are a platform, software as a service platform, designed to help schools, children's services providers, camps, recreational departments of organizations of all sizes really manage and optimize back office administration. So think about all of the mundane things that human beings have to do in the back office to transfer data from one document to a spreadsheet and then file that. Our system essentially automates all of that process. And in addition to that, we integrate payment processing into that workflow as well. So that's what we do in a nutshell. Prior to that, I've had many different spans of my career, bootstrapping companies. I've been in fitness, I've been in tech recruiting, I've been in the music industry as well. So let me stop myself before I date myself too far back. So I'll pass the mic to Erik.
Yeah, probably El Paso and out there in California. Erik, would you mind giving us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Pantheon. We're a pre-seed stage company, still very early stage, but we're essentially building a social fitness network. We're moving social fitness away from the era of like social 2.0, which is like Facebook and Instagram, and more into what I'm calling social 3.0, which is looks like, you know, gaming and the social networks around games, so Fortnite and Roblox. So I founded the company a couple of years ago, jumped from my previous job, Notch, into Pantheon in late 2019, just before COVID. So I got to try to start building a company in the throes of a pandemic. Prior to that, I was on the founding team of a company called Notch. I was the fourth person on the team. I was the head of operations, and I helped scale it all the way through Series B and over 40 million in funding from some cool venture capital funds. And I guess where that's relevant here is I was in charge of hiring pretty much everybody after I joined, and I was responsible for a lot of the culture development. So we were chosen by Inc. as one of the top places to work in the country 2 years in a row. And I think a large part of that was because of the culture we built. I was also on the early team of an incubator called StartX out of Stanford. And I was part of the team that helped create the company values there. It's a nonprofit, but we were treating it like a startup as we started building it out. And I was part of the core team that helped decide, what the company values were, the employee values, the product values. And that really shaped a lot of the way that I think about how you build an organization and organizational culture. Before that, I did my JD at Stanford and I studied business at UTEP. So company culture has been like a personal interest of mine. And I think the way that you get people together to build something massively valuable is incredibly interesting.
Okay. How do you define that business culture? Is it a philosophy? Is it a set of principles? How would you describe it? And also, what would be your particular business culture philosophy?
Yeah, I think the way that I define culture because it can be a lot of things, but the way I define it is the way that people act when nobody is watching them. So at least the way that I try to build culture within the organizations that I've worked on is it's almost like the operating system for an individual when no one is looking over their shoulders. And, it's not a bunch of nice statements written on a wall somewhere or, on your company's mission statement. It has to be reduced to action. And it's not, when your manager is like making sure that you're doing your work, it's not how you act then, it's how you act at every other part of the day. And, that comes together with groups where, how do groups interact with each other when nobody is looking? How does the CEO act when nobody is looking? How does a customer service rep act when nobody is looking? And all of those behaviors, I think, together come to make the company culture. And then the second part of your question, what is, our company culture? The culture that you develop for a company just varies drastically from company to company, depending on what the company is trying to achieve. I think the culture should match your objectives to a large degree. When you start the company, you have certain things that you're trying to achieve long term, and you should build a culture that matches with those objectives. Because again, if the culture is how people act when nobody's watching, you need to decide what you want those people to be doing, and so you can design that in advance. And so for my current company, one of the things that we really care about is respect for our customers. We're building a fitness product, and that involves a lot of sensitivities around health and fitness data. And so one of our values, for example, is respect. And we want to a team that treats each other with respect. And the reason for that is if we don't have that internal respect day to day, then you can't expect people to just turn that on when they're having a customer interaction, or you can't expect them to just turn that on when they're designing a new feature, developing a new feature for a customer. So again, I think it varies by organization, but for ours, respect is a huge one. We have a handful of other values that we bake into the culture, but that's just a brief example. I'm sure Stephen has a cool answer there too.
Well,
Yes.
I don't know that my answer is going to be as cool as that, but I would try. The way that I think about culture really has to, well, first of all, let's take a step back. Before we think about culture, I want to think about the purpose behind the culture. Is the purpose driven by some internal workings of the company, meaning that is this simply a business protocol, or is the culture driven by something greater? So for instance, at our company, we're looking to make an impact on the education industry, meaning that we see things that can be disrupted in a good way to make it so that teachers, administrators, anyone that's working in that particular vertical should be doing less work so they can focus on the quality of education for our children. So the driver behind our culture is impacting education and thinking about what our children are going to excel at or improve upon as they get older, right? So as we think about that, we want to also make sure that our employees, our team members, anyone that we bring into the organization to support that cause, feel that. So there needs to be, in my opinion, a lot of passion behind the culture. So it's not simply just culture as mechanism, but culture as passion, culture as the driver to meet the mission statement. So as we develop our protocols and our processes to fulfill that, we always have to take a step back and ask ourselves, is what we're doing supporting that mission?
Okay, so you both explained an example, the passion part or the respect. How does that specifically translate into relationships or actions? You mentioned that that's what you promote as a culture, but in the day-to-day, how does that look? Stephen, that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, so you think about, passion. So, if we're not creating an environment for our team members coming to work where they're passionate about doing, then we're doing something wrong. We don't want our employees to come to work to think about checking off a list of tasks. There are many companies that can fulfill that. What we want to do is we want to, gosh, I hate to use this word because it's so played out. Innovate. We want to innovate how our employees think about work. In my perspective, work should be 30% taking care of what needs to be done, 30% creative time to really think outside of the box, to bring some crazy ideas that you can may never be able to reach. That 30% is really, really important. The other 30%, it's about, meeting the customer's needs, engaging with the customers, be very, very tight with what's happening in the industry. And then you have 10% of flex time to put out fires, to do everything else that's not contained there. But the 30, 30, 30, that's the basis, the foundation of what our culture looks like.
Okay, that's a great way of putting it, like very visual and informative. Erik, how does the respect part actually translate into actions and relationships?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different for my company right now because we're tiny. It's me and my co-founder and like a handful of part-time, junior part-time employees. But I think, to give an example from my prior company, we had a different set of values, but one of the areas where value our culture was really important is that when you're building something and moving forward incredibly fast, you don't necessarily have the time to manage every single decision that's getting made by every single one of your employees. And the culture plays a very important part for helping people make those decisions on their own and making them in a way that promotes what the company's objectives are. And so one area where, having a culture is incredibly important is it just reduces the oversight and the management time and the decision making difficulty, right? Even for the employee. If you're a junior employee and you have a great culture around, how the team is supposed to function, you can make those decisions on your own without needing to go to a manager and ask for permission or whatever, because it's been baked into your day-to-day action. So I think, on a day-to-day basis, it makes your team a lot more effective and a lot more efficient because people are empowered to make decisions on their own about whatever it is that they might be working on, whether it's product, customer service, marketing, whatever. So it does have, again, I think if you do a great job of building your culture and you build it in the right way, it's not just website decoration. It's actually really practical and useful for the team.
Okay. What would you say are, if you could boil down all of that wisdom and knowledge of business culture into specific lessons or actionable points, what are the best practices? What are the lessons or tips and tricks, or what can you say are the main points on business culture? Erik, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I was going to say, Steven, go first because I need to think about that.
Okay, Steven.
All right, tag, I'm it. Okay, I'll play. Recently, we were interviewed by Forbes, and there was this article about just employee burnout. And, they wanted to know what we're doing about employee burnout. So ironically, a month before we were contacted by Forbes, we actually implemented a policy about communicating through Slack and email messages. So for example, at our company, if you're going to email someone after business hours, you have to schedule it. So in other words, if it's like 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, and we know that for that particular line function, they should be off of work, they can email, but they have to schedule send for the next morning so that the next employee doesn't get dinged after work and get stressed out. So we're really conscientious these days about mental health, about how we protect our employees and our team workers' mental health. Because you can imagine that at a startup company where we're moving at light speed, every single message is an important message. Every single message could be a potential fire. So that's just a lot of stress. And same thing with Slack. When we're on Slack, there's 50 different channels that are going back and forth: product development, support, payment operations, on and on and on. And every time someone posts a message on Slack, you get a little dinger on your phone. So that's horrible. So what we've done on Slack is the same thing. There's one channel for after hours, and everybody is muted from that channel except for the person that's designated to be on that channel for that particular day. So we're running rotations after hours. So those are some of the things, more pragmatic things that we've done to help our employees. The other thing that we've just done recently is that we've mandated 15% of the work week as personal creative projects. So every week, our employees need to look at their calendar and block off 15% of the time to do work that's not work related. It can be work related, but it really shouldn't be. It should be like a creative project, something that's going to inspire them. And in turn, we believe that's going to make for just a healthier mindset. And with those healthier mindsets, better attitude, more spiritual balance, you're coming in there with a lot of rejuvenation. So those are some of the key things that we've done. And so far it's been really great.
Yeah. Those culture things go beyond just how you work, right? It's all of the things are around it, the habits and all the other actions. Erik, would you like to tag in now?
Get tagged in. Yeah. Again, I think one of I'll use a pragmatic lesson that I learned from my prior company. One of the most important things that I think you can do when building your culture is to not fall into the trap of thinking that perks are culture. So I saw us fall into this a little bit with my old job, and we had to do some work to dig out of this, which is, we did a lot of the fun startup things where you got free lunch at the office, or you had like food delivered to you, and we had like whatever, healthy snacks at the office, and we had like a cool, fun office in Manhattan. And people love that stuff. It's really important and it's really valuable, but that is not your culture. The problem that we came across is that when we started hiring remote, we were growing, we were expanding, we needed to have a West Coast office. What we started to see was that the employees that weren't in the office to like enjoy all of these like fun, whatever free stuff that we were giving them, were not having a great time with the company, and they weren't adopting the company culture. And that's because the company culture was sort of superficial at that time, or elements of it were superficial. We were leaning too heavily on those superficial elements. So, the things that Stephen just mentioned, those are like real tangible things that affect the way that people act and the way that people feel and function. And so those contribute to developing a culture. And all the like fun superficial things are nice, but I think that's like if we're talking about practical tips, don't think that giving your employees like a fun startup t-shirt and free lunch is going to give you like a good startup culture. It's got to run a lot deeper than that.
Okay. What do you both think about using metrics and measuring the culture part? This is open to anyone who would like to start.
Erik,
So my personal take with it, again, I think it depends on the company that you're trying to build and the objectives that you're trying to achieve. There are some companies like Google is famous for being very heavily based on like their OKR system. And that has its benefits and its drawbacks for the company, right? Like Google's a very data-driven, data-intensive company. For us personally, we don't use, the product that we're building is almost like going the opposite, where we're taking raw data and turning it into something that's not measurable. And so our company as it exists now is not like, the way that we evaluate employees is not based on metrics as much as it is based on outcomes. And that matches our product. Again, if we were building a company that was, developing tools for reducing friction in financial transactions, some like heavily quantifiable stuff, then I would probably build a heavily quantifiable culture around that. But right now, that's not what we're doing. And again, we're moving in sort of the opposite direction of a lot of the industry. And I think our culture is moving in that direction as well.
Okay. Stephen?
Yeah, so we do have a standard practice of measuring, we call these mood surveys. We send them out, you answer them, they're anonymous, right? So they're basically, every month we'll send out about 10 questions. And they're just, what I would consider practical questions. Do you feel that you're being treated fairly is one of the questions. Do you feel that the company that you work for value diversity? That's another question. Do you feel that your compensation is in line with your counterparts in the industry? So we measure these things and we get back a set of answers, or people will answer, and people can also have the opportunity to write in some comments as well. And I've seen the entire spectrum, and that's useful for us. We're still a relatively small company and super early, so our intention there is to really get a gauge of how we're performing as a leadership team in terms of making sure that our employees are feeling like they're valued. And if there's any instance where there's a detractor score, we want to address that, not at the employee level, but at the company level. So for instance, if we ever got something like, we don't think that Curacubby values diversity, that would be a big red flag for us, and we want to investigate that. So, so the answer is yes. We do send out qualitative surveys and to measure these things. I think it's for the stage that we're at, that's important.
Yeah. Okay. Again, it really depends on what you're looking for and what are your objectives. So again, with the topic of this talk about innovation, fostering by business culture. What type of business culture is the most fueling towards innovation, but within the employees, within the same business? what kind of culture should one aim for?
I'll let Stephen go first.
All right, tag them in again. I'll go. Okay. So I think that answer really depends. It depends on the stage that the company's at. If you're, super, super early, and we've been there many times before, I think the culture at that point is the culture of speed, the culture of urgency, the culture of, fast to market. So that's a very different mindset than, say, a company that's like post Series B or going to Series C or D. At that point, you're really looking about, scaling, the other very valuable attributes of the company, which is like, in employee happiness. Not to say that employee happiness isn't important at the very early stages of a company, but I would say that, as priorities, they tend to be ranked a little bit lower than speed of urgency. The short answer to that question is that it really depends on the stage of the company. It really, really does. Because I think if you're a small company and you have to get to market fast and you spend most of your time measuring employee happiness, your product may never get to market. Because I'll tell you, at the earlier stages, most of us are disgruntled. Most of us are overworked. Most of us are like asking ourselves this question on a daily basis: what did I get myself into? So the happiness score is always going to be very low, for example, right? But as you grow and you start to understand the desires and the requirements of the people that you're hiring, then that's a secondary question. So again, it depends on the stage of the company.
So true. Erik?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think one thing that I've also seen, like a very specific, like, I don't think there's a whole lot of like right answers or wrong answers when you're building culture, but one thing that I specifically have seen that tech companies are good at and that startups are generally good at, that other types of businesses are not, is that they understand that good ideas can come from anywhere, and they empower some sort of mechanism, or they create some sort of mechanism to surface those ideas. A lot of like other, traditional businesses have almost the opposite, where they smother the ideas, or they intentionally create or unintentionally create structures where those ideas have no room to breathe, no room to circulate and move their way up. And I think that's why a lot of these older traditional businesses, or that's one of the reasons why so many of them can't compete with startups, is all the ideas are like top down and imposed by a management team and a research group and market studies and all of this stuff. And there's not a whole lot of room for all of the employees. And that means all of the employees, right? There's like the classic story of the guy who invented hot Cheetos was like the janitor or whatever, right? And I think, as much as you can do to create those opportunities for people to share ideas, those ideas to get credit and to be heard, again, the specific mechanisms will vary. I think for me personally, in an ideal world, everyone should have the opportunity to speak up and just talk when they have an idea. I know that's not necessarily practical at all companies or all stages of companies. So maybe there's ways for people to submit ideas and have them get voted on, whatever. You can get creative about that process. But Stephen has the 15% personal employee work time. Like that's a version of that. That I think is incredibly important, because again, ideas can come from everywhere, and you should be looking at every single one of your employees as like an idea factory for whatever it is that you're trying to build.
Okay. What are your thoughts on designing a culture, like specifically, purposely, versus usually what is the case on businesses where they rely on the natural leadership, like top to bottom, that they hope the values of leadership and management permeate to the rest of the business? Like, should culture be designed or should culture be evolved? What are your thoughts on that?
I can answer that. I think one of the core benefits of building a startup is that you get to choose every single person that you hire, right? Like when you're employee one, every person that comes after you is partially a product of your choice. And so, there's room for building culture from the top, but as you hire people, you should be selecting for people that are going to contribute to and build up on your culture in a way that you want. I think it's, you see a lot of companies that will hire people that look exactly like them and think exactly like them. I think that's also a mistake. We used to talk about not culture fit, but culture ads a lot at my prior company. So hiring people that are going to contribute to the culture in a positive way. So it's almost like growing a little tree where you get to choose what what the branches are gonna look like. So when you have the opportunity to do that, when you have the opportunity to choose every single employee that walks through your door, then you don't necessarily have to impose a culture necessarily, because you've self-selected for the people that are going to push the company forward in the ways that you want. I think if that is probably, in my opinion, the most important step in making sure that your employees are, again, pushing the culture in the direction that you want, because it's really hard to change who a person is fundamentally and some of their more ingrained habits if they don't already align with what you're trying to do.
Now, I understand that's a very founder's perspective, like the startup beginning a business. What would you think would change for companies that are already established, small, medium, even large companies with more employees, designing a culture versus like hiring a new leadership and trying to change the culture top down?
I have no answers because I've never worked in a company like that. So I'll let Steven jump in.
Yeah, so I tend to think about your question in terms of sports. I'll use basketball, for example, right? So a team to be effective should basically follow the same playbook, so that every single player on that team understands the plays, and they're not confused by that. However, that playbook needs to be iterated from season to season. So what you're playing preseason and postseason and going into championships are completely different. So for mid-sized organizations, I think you do need to drive down some foundation from the top down. Okay, that being said, going back to the sports team analogy, as you're getting to know your players, you're going to want to get their input at some point, right? Because you can call these plays all day long, but if your players are making moves that are better than the playbook that you've installed, it's to your benefit to get that input. So iteration is critical as we're growing. We're facing that now. 2 years ago, most of the cultural impacts were being driven down by the leadership team. I'll say this, today, last week, this week, most of our input is coming from our employees. So iteration, and that may change as well as we grow into the next stage of the company. It may be another kind of top-down driven policy. We don't know yet, but I think you're going to be able to get more employee input into that cultural perspective as the team as a whole develop trust, and I think that trust thing has to be there.
Okay, and again, this thinking about how does it translate to bigger organizations? For example, here where we have thousands of employees, even if the employees are not in a single location, how does that business culture design or leadership translate into the virtual setting of nowadays?
I think it really just depends on the objectives of the company. Going back to the mission statement, and we'll use Amazon and Google for a comparative analysis. I mean, those companies' cultures couldn't be further apart, right? And there's not one right or wrong answer there. They're just different. And I think having that diversity is important as well, because you're going to have some people that are going to flock towards the Google philosophy, and then you're going to have some people that love the Amazon philosophy, and right by their shareholders. So it just really depends on so many variables. But I think at the end of the day, there is no one right answer per se.
And I think, Alberto, to get to the question about like how do you change the culture of large existing organization, I think it's incredibly difficult. And it takes a lot of time. You see company turnarounds like Apple, what Apple did in when Steve Jobs went back. You see what Microsoft has done more recently, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to turn one of these ships around. And if I think, if I knew the answers to how, Satya Nadella or how Steve Jobs did that, I would be, CEO of one of those companies, because it truly is that difficult. I don't think there's like a magic bullet solution that you can kind of distill into a presentation like this, because those outcomes are incredibly rare.
Yeah, and it's important to understand those things, and especially to do right from the first time, from the beginning. How does the city or base that your company is, how does that influence your culture? For example, Erik, you're in El Paso, Stephen, you're in California. How you've worked, Erik, you've worked in Manhattan. So how geographically does it influence? Erik, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get different people in different cities. I think, one of the benefits of being in San Francisco is that you're going to get a lot of incredibly talented people with sort of institutional experience. So, one of my experiences in California is that when we hired a person, they were ready to jump in, straight into projects. They knew the language, and it was pretty easy for them to figure out like what we were trying to build and how to build it. With that came a lot of, and no offense to Stephen or any of the other companies in California, we ended up getting a lot of employees that were, almost like spoiled, where, you had to give them absolutely everything because that's what they were used to. They had worked at Google or at Facebook. They were used to being pampered to a large degree. And that was something that we actually got tired of with my previous company. And one of the reasons we moved to Manhattan is because we got tired of competing for Facebook employees who came in and, wanted to be treated like kings. So, looking at El Paso specifically, it's almost like the opposite problem and benefit, which is people here are very hungry, and they're very tough. And so people will work incredibly hard, and they're really eager for opportunity. But, and they're not expecting a whole lot, to be honest. And so, which is great for a startup actually, because, getting really hungry, motivated people. But then, you do have to do a lot more training and grooming, because we don't have that institutional knowledge available to us in the employee base. You don't have a lot of people that have worked at companies or built consumer products, or any products, to be quite frank. So, there are pros and cons to all geographies. We had different issues in, Manhattan, different issues in San Francisco, and I'm having different issues here in El Paso. So I do think to some degree the issue of geography is becoming not less relevant, but more relevant, because you can hire people wherever you want now if you decide that you're going to be a remote type of company. And so understanding the culture, like the weird particularities of where you're hiring, is incredibly important, because I do think cities have very different work cultures.
Yeah, definitely. Stephen, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think the geographical issues are more symptomatic of the higher educational institutes that are embedded within those geographies. So, for example, in El Paso, we have offices in El Paso, and we work with UTEP and MSU to pull candidates all the time. But that's two. In the Bay Area, there's like 10, 20, 30 if you start to count the community colleges as well. And then more importantly, you have to ask, like, what makes it so that these candidates are coming out uber competitive? It's because at least in California, and Northern California, the Bay Area specifically, you have universities teaching entrepreneurship, but not just specifically entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship blended with tech. So if you start to foster those sort of educational programs, I think you can replicate what's happening in the Silicon Valley, across many metros in the U.S. In Utah, in El Paso, in Tennessee. But it really comes down to at the very early stages, elementary school, middle school, high school. By the time they get to higher ed, these guys are already primed to be entrepreneurs in the startup world. Like, I do mentorship with high school students as well as with freshmen and sophomores in college. And you'd be amazed at how these guys are talking. They're talking like entrepreneurs, like they're primed to think that way. So I think, yes, geography, does have an impact, but I think the geography is more symptomatic of the educational institutions embedded within those geographies.
Okay. And now, thanks to the technology, culturally, those certain traits are getting more blended and more open to other locations. Like, what would you think is the impact that COVID had on business culture? Stephen.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at Stephen right.
I think there are pros and cons, right? Let's talk about the pros first. The pros that you can conduct business at a speed never seen before. So COVID has, in essence, been accelerant for a lot of the ways that we communicate. So prior to COVID, if you were to do an investor meeting, you would schedule something, go, make a reservation for dinner or lunch, and then you wait like 2 weeks because everybody's out making plans. Now with with the advent of all of the high-speed communication tools such as Zoom, you can do a meeting and it doesn't cost you like 3, 4, 5 hours to commute to the city and have dinner or lunch. You can just set a meeting and it's going to cost you 30 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pro, but at the same time, someone could also say that that's also a con, because now you're always talking. And when do you get to have that mental break? In addition to that, I don't know what the totality is, but I'm sure that, being on the computer this much can definitely have a negative impact on mental health. And I'm sure there's been a lot of studies going on that would talk about these things. Certainly, at our company, we've seen it, take a turn not for the better. So we're trying to find a right balance. It's still a work in progress. We're still trying to understand the impact of the pandemic with work from home and so on and so forth. In the Valley itself, we've seen a drastic change from companies saying that, hey, we're going to institute work from home permanently, to some companies saying now you got to come back to work in September. So things are changing all the time. So we'll see. It's been a mixed bag so far.
Okay, Erik, what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges that we're seeing right now is that a lot of the cultural things that sort of happen from live interpersonal connection are just gone. So, when you hang out with, especially in the early stages of a startup, when we first starting Notch, there were like 9 of us in an office together, 60 hours a week. And we had, shared jokes and shared weird language. And, there are certain bonds between us that carried us through very difficult times. And, I think helped us scale out once we started getting to scale, hiring more than 10 employees, helped us scale that culture out, because the 9 kind of original people on the team had such a strong impact on the people around us. So one concern that I have right now building a company is how do we replicate that when, my co-founder's in Brooklyn. One of the employees that we have is in Seattle, and a couple here in El Paso, but I don't think you can institute that stuff. I don't think you can create a culture doing like Zoom happy hour or whatever. Like it's not legitimately fun. I mean, it was kind of fun when that's all you had to do. That was your only option. But now when you can go into an office or you can do things in person, like nobody wants to do that. Like go get some sun. So that's a real challenge, trying to take advantage of these very real benefits of being able to hire from everywhere, these very real benefits of being able to conduct business, again, significantly more efficiently. Those are some very real benefits, but we're currently wrestling with how do we make sure that the next couple of my co-founder and I also worked together at my previous company, so we have that bond already built between us. I've known the guy for like 9 years. So, employee number 3 or co-founder, number 2 or 3, I guess, whatever we decide to do next, that's going to be very difficult. And so we actually just had a call today where we're like, maybe I should just go to Brooklyn for 6 months, or he needs to come to El Paso for 6 months. And, the next person we hire needs to spend like a solid 6 months in a city with us to like get some of that. I don't know when and how you replicate that. I know people are working on products and like virtual reality and all of these other things. I don't know how and when you replicate that without being in person. But that's a very real concern for me personally. There are companies that have been remote forever, and they have like a writing first work process, or they've been able to figure out how to make that happen. But again, I think for what we're trying to do specifically, the way that we're trying to innovate in our market, we think it's important to have that shared language and that shared history.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would like to remind everyone that you can write any questions you have to the speakers on the chat box, and we can ask them at the end. This is actually the final question. What do you think moving forward the business culture needs are gonna change in the near future, like in the next 2, 3, maybe even 5 years? What are the trends that you see on business culture? Erik, would you like to start?
One big shift that I've seen in my relatively short career is that more and more power is shifting to the employees. There's a scarcity of talent everywhere in the world. And if you want to hire and keep the best people, you have to show a deep concern for what their needs and wants are. And that has changed in the time that I've been working. And I see that just compounding more over time. Going back to Stephen's point about the education system, the number of companies relying on tech-skilled workers is growing, but the population of tech-skilled workers is not growing at the same pace. And so figuring out how to make yourself an appealing place for employees, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges that any company has. I started noticing this, I think maybe it was in 2013 or 2014. I think maybe I saw some companies going public, and they started listing as one of their risk factors in their S1s that they were worried about their ability to hire employees. These are public companies with billions in funding, and they're worried about being able to hire. So if you're a startup or you're a small business or you're a local business, you're going to be subject to the same competitive pressure because of, again, this relatively decreasing talent pool and the increased opportunity of remote work. As an employee, that's great for you because it means that you have more of a pick of where you're going to work, and there's greater opportunity. But for me, as I think of how I build my company over the next 3 to 5 years, I want to make sure that I have a compelling vision, a compelling mission, a compelling product, and that I treat people in the way that they're going to want to come work for me because I know they can go work wherever it is that they want.
Stephen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's going to be a huge impact on family life and how we think about work in the traditional sense. For a long time, we thought about work as a 9 to 5. Some people still call it 9 to 5. But as these remote teams are becoming more globally distributed, I often wonder, it's happening with our company right now, I often wonder how teams in different time zones are going to have to come together and communicate, considering our 9 to 5 is very different than our engineer in Greece. And how does that impact his family? How does that impact his relationship with his son? We're already seeing some evidence of that even with our employees in El Paso, because the cultural traditions in El Paso, I've come to find out are still quite different than what we have here in the Silicon Valley. So I think with you know, in the next 2 to 3 years, I would keep an eye out for how work, particularly work from home, and our new concepts of work, working hours, working engagement, how that's going to have an impact on family life, you know, marriages, the predictor of when to have children, all of that stuff. I mean, we've seen it already, but I think there's going to be an even more drastic change coming in the near future.
Yeah, the business to personal life ratio needs adjustment with all of this work from home and work remotely. Great. So with that, we've come to the end of our questions. If nobody in the audience would like to ask any questions, I would just like to thank Stephen and Erik so much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, Emma has a question. Would you like
I'm
to
just
go
not
ahead?
fast enough to type it in the chat. So it's a question about, I guess, generational differences. You guys are both young entrepreneurs, right? But still leading these.
I'm actually a dinosaur. I am. I really am.
There are dinosaurs older than us. And so just wondering about your thoughts and impressions on management teams of different generations and how their, you know, observations you've made about how they're dealing with the pandemic, with the work from home thing, with the whole startup culture, because that's a reality. And I think in different cities, you might have bigger control by different generations.
Yeah, I think that's a super relevant question. You know, Emma, I've pondered upon this, you know, a lot. And from what I've seen in my experience is that as it relates to like management, oftentimes we have to like think about like what the investors are looking for. And I think from my experience, as long as the investors are happy, you can basically have a lot of flexibility on how you want to cater to that culture, to the extent that, you know, you're not meeting investor expectations automatically, then you kind of go back to like the top down, very controlled type of culture. So, you know, as they say, you know, as long as the business is doing good, nobody's going to complain.
Yeah, I mean, my one comment there is, again, seeing from like the hiring perspective, I do think the labor shortage has like a very practical impact in the way that managers behave, which is if you're not thinking about how to create a workplace that is at least somewhat accommodating to junior employees, they're going to leave. So one of my best friends is an attorney at a very prominent Silicon Valley law firm. He's you know, on the partner track, pretty senior as far as the associate ranks go. And that used to be a job that people fought to get into. It was really tough to get a law firm job at like a tech startup firm or startup law firm like that. They cannot hire enough people at this point because employees have their pick of where to go. And all of these law firms are struggling because they don't have these junior and mid-level people who've just decided like, you know what, I don't like your work environment. I don't like the way you treat your employees. I don't like how many hours you make us work. I'm out. And now it's the firm that is struggling. These law firms are having a really difficult time. They can't serve all, you know, they're turning clients away. And so there's like a real business impetus to, you know, and it's a shift. Like I'm not that young, you know, I remember the days where it's like, you had to accommodate your employer as an employee. Like I actually got turned down for an internship because they thought I was really weird. I like didn't want to wear dress shoes and I wore Converse to work. And like, I just played by my own rules and that cost me a job. I think that power dynamic has shifted quite a bit. And I don't know how long that's going to last. But I do think it's the people in control right now are the employees. And so, you know, to the extent that, you know, you're a mid-level or senior manager and you have an ego about like the way things are supposed to be done, you might have to swallow that in order to make sure that you have enough people working at your company.
Awesome responses. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Another question?
I think there's a question in the chat. It just popped up.
Okay. How do you guys feel about hiring versus contracting since the gig economy is booming? So yeah.
You know, there's pros and cons. You know, at some point, if you're a startup, you really have no choice but to outsource, just because, you know, per Erik's statement earlier, it's sometimes it's difficult to find the level of talent to bring them in and make them W-2s. But there are some, you know, really valuable lessons to learn about developing talent in-house, right? Because ultimately the contractors are going to be either working per the culture of the contracting team that they work for, or if they're truly independent, like who knows what kind of culture or value that they bring, they know that they're a hired gun. So, you know, for them, it's about, you know, following the spec that you've written, making sure that, you know, they're as close to what your expectations are as possible. And then they check in and they check out. When you have internal employees, you know, if you're lucky, keeping your fingers crossed that you found someone that's not just going to work for the company. This person is going to help develop the company, grow the company, right? This employee is a seed that's going to sprout many different innovations for the company. Whereas the contractor, you know, that's like a bullet. It's just a straight shot, and this is for one purpose only: try to hit bullseyes as close as possible. Whereas employee, it is an organic thing. It's going to keep growing as long as you keep watering that seed and give it the nutrient. That's a totally different entity.
Yeah, and to just add to that, institutional knowledge is incredibly valuable. I think it's an undervalued asset. What somebody knows about your company and the experience they have with your company, when that walks out the door, you're losing a lot of value. There's like some stat that says it like it costs like 3 months of a person's salary to replace them, and that might even be too low. You know, contractors will learn the code base, they'll learn about your strategy or whatever. And when they're gone, all of that experience that they developed in-house is gone too. And so again, there's pros and cons. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to hire somebody full-time because the task that they're working on isn't, you know, long enough or big enough, whatever, or maybe just financially you can't pay for a full-time employee. But for certain roles, you know, the investment in that institutional knowledge is incredibly valuable.
Great, awesome insights. We've arrived to the 5 o'clock mark, and thank you everyone for joining in to this Tech Tuesday. Thank you so much, Stephen and Erik, for those insights. All of your responses were very, a lot of wise nuggets woven between them. I would just like to finish off inviting everyone to join our next week Tech Tuesday. It's a special innovator showcase with 2 of our startups from the Innovation Center. We're very proud of them, and hope to see everyone there. Thank you again, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Erik.
Thank you, Alberto.
Thank you, guys.